Joe Pardavila. This is the Forbes Books podcast, and nearly all the big tech companies are investing in virtual reality. It's basically everyone. It's probably easier to name companies that aren't jumping into VR than the ones that are. Here's what's at stake. The global virtual reality market is expected to more than triple over the next 7 years, expanding from $21 billion to $69 billion by 2028. And my guest this week is on the forefront of creating content for this brand new virtual world. His name is Joel Newton. He's an award-winning filmmaker and co-founder of CityLights, a VR company that specializes in bringing immersive cinematic storytelling to broader audiences. Joel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too, sir. And you're running a VR company here, and I joke with a lot of folks who are involved in the metaverse and AR about being a Gen Xer and talking about VR, because to a Gen Xer, virtual reality was pretty shitty. When it first came out, there was that bad Stephen King movie, Lawnmower Man, and there was like that movie Virtuosity. So most virtual reality that we're familiar with is all pretty crappy. And so now we're seeing this burgeoning metaverse that's unfolding before our eyes, and VR is part of that whole world. So talk to me about how VR has gotten into your life.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm Gen X too. I agree with you that I think there's a spectrum of people's reaction to new or technologies that aren't even that great, but suggest what could be. And so I think you have your like total evangelists, like even going back to Lawnmower Man, where it's like, this is inevitable. This is going to happen. Look at what the future is going to be like. And I think our generation is a bit more like, yeah, but it sucks. and like, I do think that the inevitability thinking has been a consistent dangerous trap, where there's this idea that just because a technology exists, it's going to change the whole world and every single human being is going to use it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's allowed for a lot of capital to get invested kind of in a half-baked way. It creates some of those kind of like hype bubbles. And then also creates a moment like right now where you'll talk to like the random banker who's all about the buzzwords of NFTs and Web3.
Yes.
And like I even got advice the other day of like, oh, you shouldn't say virtual reality. VR's out. And it's like 5 years ago, VCs were pouring money into VR and it didn't work.
Right.
Like that attitude of like 5 years ago, that hype cycle is when, if you actually looked at what was inevitable and you look at Moore's Law, which I think is a big part of why people think things are inevitable, is because we have these like kind of scientific proofs that things will get faster and technology will get better. And once it's faster, once it's better, then we'll all use it. And that kind of ignores the human component. But 5 years ago, if you actually analyze that, you would say, okay, so this is going to get a lot closer to mainstream right around 2022.
Right. It's so funny you say that, because really, if memory serves, I think that VR bubble burst in like 2016, right, or thereabouts. And then you started the company a couple of years after that. So what happened between the VR bubble bursting and your creation of your company?
Well, my background wasn't in technology at all. VR is the only thing that got me familiar with kind of the rhythms and the community and the people of like Silicon Valley and VCs and all that. My whole background was in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. I worked in development. I was a writer. I was a director, producer, manager of artists, manager of directors and writers at my company. And the industry was definitely going through its transition from what I call like, the full menu of all the types of movies to that compression that was happening into the tentpole movies. Mm-hmm. There was this like famous kind of infographic that everybody would share about Hollywood decades apart, where it was like how many of the biggest movies were sequels,
right?
Or and like it had gotten to the point where we had all these clients doing independent film, and like I would go to Sundance every year, and we'd have movies in Sundance, and like that world of writers and filmmakers going to film school at USC, like kind of indie cinema was really what I cut my teeth on, and like we're looking at all of our clients and the job opportunities and coming through, probably post 2010, especially, that was a shift that was impossible to ignore. And I had clients that just had no interest in doing big budget studio things. But there was also a part of me that was raised on Star Wars, and like there was part of me that loves that kind of stuff and wanted to work with artists or find a way in to bringing the best of what we were doing in the indie world in terms of real human stories, developing great quality character arcs, and movies that we think matter, but going like, why can't we do that in sci-fi, or why can't we do that in big franchise IP? And obviously a lot of people were thinking that way, because from then till now you had the Marvel decade. And so I signed a series of clients to my management company that were world leading in their department. Either it was a production designer or DPs who wanted to create their own IP, who wanted to direct. And my instinct was, having a director client who had done a low budget indie drama at Sundance was actually less of a filmmaking starting point for that world than a client who had won an Oscar on Avatar as the production designer.
Wow.
And that was Rob Stromberg. Rob is a really unique guy. I don't know if anyone will ever repeat the type of career path Rob went on, because Avatar was his very first film as production designer.
Wow.
That's like one heck of a rookie season.
You go ahead and walk out. It's like the old Seinfeld bit. Like, I'm done. Just walk out. Go on.
Well, he
notes.
wasn't. I mean,
yeah.
No, he wins the Oscar for Avatar, and 12 months later, he wins the Oscar for Alice in Wonderland.
Wow.
And back-to-back Oscars on your first and second credit is just probably never, ever going to be done again. And the dynamic was, he had been in the art departments of all of those big movies for many, many years. Rick Carter was his co-designer on Avatar, and Rick is the godfather. He designs all of Steven's movies. He's probably the most creative, genius, smart person I've ever met in the world. And, Rick saw Rob's talent and brought him into that role, and he flourished on those years of Avatar, where when they started, they didn't even know how they were going to make that movie. Like, it was truly like, here's the mission, and now we're going to figure out how to get there.
Right.
And being early with the virtual cameras, like we had that handheld virtual camera in our office for years before Facebook acquired Oculus.
Wow.
And my job was to get Rob from production designing into directing, and thankfully, Joe Roth and Disney believed in him, and we pulled that off on a movie called Maleficent, which was a big Disney movie with Angelina Jolie playing Maleficent. And Rob was actually in London directing Maleficent when I saw an Oculus for the first time. And the first instinct I had was, this is awesome, but it's actually not that different than what we were doing on Avatar. Like, they just strapped it to your face.
Right.
And Rob had a lot of vision about the future of like all digital backlots. Like, basically everything that everybody's doing today that they call virtual production, like this is all the stuff he and I were talking about back in 2012, 2013. He got back from London. We were doing kind of our brainstorming on what to do next. And our company that we had started was really focused on building new IP. And like kind of like creating franchises, but like leveraging all of the technology and all the virtual stuff and all this like visualization secret sauce that really, it was a pretty small group of people in those days that they were using. Like, people don't think about it, but Alice in Wonderland was a massive step forward in terms of the way they used automated camera movements and green screen
and 3D,
and production
right?
visualization and 3D, like all kinds of like the building blocks of virtual production kind of from those years of like Avatar, Alice in Wonderland, Oz, the Great and Powerful. Rob designed that one as well. And it's like, all of that was really the foundation of what you see really kind of becoming ubiquitously understood by everybody with like Mandalorian in the last couple of years. And, it's like, this was before there were VR headsets, before anybody was using the phrase VR, but we were doing movie making in VR. Like, we were building it all, like using game engines, using rapid prototyping, not rendering anything, just, using it as a creative tool to imagine and create and iterate and bring a lot of the best of the animation cycle and pipeline into live action filmmaking. So kind of in that context, I tell Rob, I said, hey, he had this original idea, and I thought it was really what we should focus on next, more than any of the other like sequels and franchise things he was being offered. And he goes, hey, I'm so encouraged that you like that idea, but I kind of wanted to hang on to that idea until I could do it in virtual reality. And I had never heard him use that word before, ever. And I'm like, oh, did you see an Oculus? And he goes, no, I read about it. I haven't seen it yet. And I'm like, I just saw one. It's amazing. And, we talked about it a bit, and he's like, well, look, Facebook just paid all this money for them. Maybe they, let's talk to them. Maybe we want to do it. Like maybe they want to do a big movie to launch their headset. A very naive concept in 2014 or whatever it was. But couple weeks later, we go down, we have a meeting, and Rob goes into the same, that Valve room, the same room that Mark Zuckerberg had gone into at the headquarters there. And Mark Zuckerberg had come out and said, we have to buy this company. But Rob comes out and he looks at me and he goes, I don't ever want to do film or TV ever again. And that was like kind of a shocking thing because we had so much work kind of banked into getting his film directing career.
Wow.
We were just getting started, but he he started out matte painting on glass, like actually painting on glass, right? Before movie making was digital at all. And he kind of watched that transition where there was all this technology available, but no one was using it. And really it wasn't until artists used it that there was like the sudden shift. But, if you know the history of the visual effects business in Hollywood, like it's like a string of bankruptcies and all kinds of problems and artists being overworked and getting to the point of feeling exploited. And then those companies trying to go out on their own and make their own movies, and that never works. And it was just like, there's just a massive cultural frustration amongst all of those artists going, the special effects have become the big movie star, but those artists don't get paid the way movie stars get paid.
Right.
They don't earn back end.
Right. The guy who's doing the Avengers artwork isn't getting what Robert Downey's getting.
Yeah. I mean, in general, you can get into all the specifics, but basically the market dynamic of Rob feeling like everything he worked on went out and made $1 billion for someone else, and going like, this opportunity, this metaverse, we didn't use that phrase at the time, but him just seeing the future and going, this is going to be the future of media, and I want to go all in right now.
Wow. So when you walked in and set up that meeting with Facebook, did you guys have a company built at that point? It was just
nope.
It was how'd you get a meeting with a non-company with Facebook? How did that happen?
Well, I had left my management company to start a production company with The Third Floor and Rob and Dylan Cole, who's designing all the new Avatar movies. And so we had this production company. We were developing a slate of like movie IP. And that was the context of that movie idea that he said he wanted to do in VR. So that day in the lobby of the old Irvine Oculus offices, we started a new VR startup called the VR Company.
Wow.
We didn't know what we were doing. We hired a guy that had been a contractor for us in the past who understood Unreal Engine for what we were trying to do. And Facebook gave us, or Oculus gave us like one of their like really early, like, prototype developer kits. And we made 5 minutes of that movie idea. And it turned out really, really good.
Wow.
And we started showing it to people, and they also thought it was really good. And then we had the chance to show it to Steven Spielberg. And he had actually been really discouraging about VR. Like he specifically talked about how, like, as a filmmaker for stories, like the frame of the movie is so important for the director, and directing the audience's experience.
I'm assuming this meeting happened before Ready Player One.
Definitely way before Ready Player One. So it was Rick Carter who was designing the BFG for Steven at the time. Mm-hmm. He had been in our office because the Third Floor guys were doing a lot of pre-visualization on that with Rick, and Rob was there that day, and we showed Rick the VR thing. Rob had tried to get Steven to watch it, and Steven told us why it wouldn't work for stories, and like wasn't that interested in it, and we were all discouraged. And then Rick basically was like, Steven, you got to see it. It's awesome. And so then we flew out to the East Coast and we showed it to Steven, and he got it. He just got so excited, and he joined our board of advisors, and it just kind of triggered like so many doors opening and so many things happening. And we raised a ton of money. The truth is, the whole formation of that company and the whole cycle of fundraising was following the like more tech startup model,
Right.
And we got to the point where it was time to like make some of these projects, and making the type of content that we were used to making is spending millions of dollars for every sequence. I was like, hey, this isn't how it works. Like J.J. Abrams doesn't sell 20% of Bad Robot to make a new movie. Like Disney doesn't sell 20% of Disney every time they want to go make a movie. Like this venture capital structure is actually really, really, really wrong for a company that is not a tech company. Like we weren't inventing a VR headset. We weren't making a software platform.
You were creating content, basically.
We
right?
were ultimately a bunch of content guys wanting to make awesome movies, you know? And so I had grown in my conviction that like we needed to make a lot of content or else consumers were never going to care. Putting a headset on is cumbersome.
Mm-hmm.
The experience is nifty and novel and mind-blowing for some people. For those of us who had that kind of like that mind-blowing moment of like, oh my gosh, this is the future. And you know, everybody in VR at that time was just all the true believers, all the people who had that
the early adopters.
Kind of
yeah,
that like that, you know, just that revelatory moment where you go, oh my gosh, this is the future. I have to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
And like I had that moment, Rob had that, you know, all of us had that moment. But I was like, for the mainstream to care, it's going to be the content, right? I started researching and reading, and like, you know, there were all these like moments in history where like nobody would buy a TV when TVs first got invented, and they realized, oh, the content is the only thing that's going to get the average family in America to buy a TV. So they started subsidizing lots of content. So I was talking to Samsung and Oculus and all these companies. I'm like, guys, we have to put together a big content fund, and trying to get all the big tech companies on earth to collaborate was a big fool's errand for me. But I'd gotten in my head that a big content fund was actually what would drive adoption. We had just raised the big A round. It was enough capital for the company's projects, and the real focus of Rob, you know, the things he wanted to make were pretty much set for a while. And you know, Stephen had helping us got the rights to do a Jurassic VR experience with Universal that opened exclusively at Dave & Buster's. And so in some sense, my startup that was funded like a VC startup was up and running, and the projects we were going to make, there was enough capital to make those. But I had become kind of like the VR evangelist in Hollywood, where I was showing VR to other filmmakers and lots of studio heads and lots of people, and everyone was like, let's do something, let's do something, let's do something. I just had this like several month period where I was showing a different celebrity VR for the first time, like every day. And all of them wanted to do something. I'm like, the only way we can do all this content is if we structure it more like Legendary, or more like, you know, these different film funds that fund lots and lots of movies.
Where it's private equity, right?
Yeah, in that structure, in more of a content fund structure. And so in 2017, I left VRC on good terms. Like, you know, it's like even to the point of, hey, if I succeed, you know, like I'll fund more of your content too. But my mission was to go out and put a fund together.
So Joel, when you left, so you guys survived that bubble burst then, right? That original company? Or it's still...
Yeah, because the one thing that we didn't conform to the VC, the more powerful VC prevailing models, was like invest with this kind of like move fast, break things, solve your problem, and find product market fit, and exit. And it's like nobody was going to find product market fit with any kind of VR content or software in 18 months.
Right.
Because like 18 months later, the world was the exact same place in the sense that literally no one had a VR headset.
Right.
And so I think a lot of that investment capital found itself in the bear trap of inevitability when they saw the Samsung Gear VR or the Google Cardboard, where they're like, oh, there are 1 billion users for VR because everyone has a phone, and everyone's phone becomes a VR device. And without really stress testing that hypothesis that actually consumers don't want their phone to become something else.
Mm-hmm. So when you walked away, it was right after the sort of like the VR crash that happened. If you were to put your finger on just like why that VR crashed that time in the mid 2000s, what was it? Because it was too early? Do you think that was the main culprit at the time?
I think in the market, when people talk about the bust, like they're really just talking about like venture capital going into the asset class.
Okay.
So like a bunch of venture capital went into a bunch of VR startups, and then a few years later, when none of those companies had hit the milestones that those unrealistic expectations, kind of came baked in, and when none of those companies were hitting them, it was like, oh, VR is not going to work. VR is a bust. But I actually think the issue was when they wrote the check. The issue was when they funded it in the first place with those shorter term expectations. And honestly, I think we're going through something really, really similar right now with all things having to do with the word metaverse.
Yes.
I think Google Cardboard is the perfect example of a moment that suggests the future that people misunderstand as the right now technology is going to work. Like, nobody wanted to watch anything with a Google Cardboard for more than a few minutes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's neat. That's novel. Oh, that's pretty cool. That's that's kind of like a neat 360 viewer gimmick, right? And so like a lot of things that could be free, right? Like a Verizon sponsored promotion.
Yes.
Or, things like that.
I think that's how I got mine. I think Verizon sent one in the mail to me, and I was like, oh, this is cool for 5 minutes. I'm never using this again.
And look, the New York Times, I think, had a bolder vision of seeing the power of it for journalism.
Yeah, didn't they send it to everyone? Yeah.
They sent it to everyone, but that doesn't mean everyone's going to use it or wants to use it.
Well, I think my take on the metaverse, obviously not experience as you in this, until they come up with a cool way to experience it, I just don't see the mainstream audience getting involved. Like, until Apple gets involved and they make this really cool Meta glasses or something like that. As awesome the Oculus experience is, because I just got one, as awesome as that experience is, I can't, again, maybe I'm not the target demographic, but like after a few minutes, I'm like, all right, this is cool. I'm done. It's not super comfortable having this big thing sticking on your head. You don't know what's happening in the rest of your life around you.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going on in your surroundings. But do you think it's probably just at this point with the getting into the metaverse, and I know a lot of people make the mistake that they confuse VR with metaverse. It's two obviously mutually exclusive things there. But do you think until there's a better way to enjoy the metaverse and or VR, that's when it'll become more mainstream?
Look, I think there's a systematic way to break it down. Like Michael Abrash, the chief scientist at Meta, he does this annual talk at their conference where he breaks down kind of like, hey, here's where we're at, State of the Union, and here's where we need to go. And he goes through the senses, like vision, hearing, your vestibular system, smell, taste, touch, haptics, all of that kind of stuff. And I've actually seen advances in all of those that, like at the lab level, that re-excite me, that give me that aha moment all over again, where I go, oh my gosh, once the world does this, it's over. Like I've had that experience multiple times as I see that where the technology is going. But I think the issue is like, what is the experience that is so compelling it overcomes all of the current but temporary boundaries you just described?
Yeah.
The biggest one for me is, I think right now there is kind of an exuberance around low poly animated avatar based metaverse experiences. Whether it's Minecraft or Fortnite or Roblox, the idea that I've got a little avatar in this virtual world and now I can watch concerts, I can do different things that, there'll be a whole world or a whole economy that fills into that. And then the first versions of like Facebook's like Horizon or Meta's Horizons, the visual fidelity, the low poly animated cartoonish nature of Rec Room or these more official platforms, or if you look in a different way, like you look at like what Google's doing with Google Earth and like, like that level of photogrammetry of the whole world. I actually think there's just a bar of visual quality that early adopters don't care about.
Right.
And technologists forgive. But like my 17-year-old cousin, who's just a girl who likes Instagram, won't ever go into a virtual world if it doesn't look a certain way.
Yeah.
I think everyone is forgiving that too much. And I think that's going to create a kind of a boom bust cycle where they're like, oh, a certain percentage of society is super happy to spend their whole day inside of something that looks like Minecraft or Roblox.
Right.
The counterpoint to this, the person who disagrees with me, the person who's like on the bullish case, says today's kids are the kids who made Minecraft such a success. And all of the grown-ups looked at Minecraft and said, that doesn't look good. Because we grew up in the world where like the graphics getting better was the progress we grew up with.
Right.
Halo,
we started with Halo, Assassin's Creed. Yeah,
we started with Super Mario and we got to Assassin's Creed. So for us, that ramp of visual quality in our gaming is so associated with better, so associated with quality, so associated with something that's like good. But their argument is like today's kids are like, hey, we care about the experience. We don't care what it looks like.
Yeah.
We don't care that it looks like Roblox or looks like Minecraft. What I like is my ability to have autonomy, my ability to create, my ability to control things.
Yeah.
And I go, yeah, you're probably right. There probably is a lot of like utility that has a lower bar. There's a lot of like interactivity. There's a lot of utility. There's a lot of social fun that primarily younger people right now are excited to have and are willing to do. And as they get older, maybe they won't bring kind of a Gen X or even older millennial attitude about visual quality.
Yeah.
But I'm looking bigger at like the media landscape because I'm coming from Hollywood. I'm not coming from gaming.
Right. Joel, it almost sounds like what you're saying is people will accept Roblox as Roblox, but they don't want the entire of metaverse to look like Roblox. There could be certain parts of it that look like a Roblox, or even they don't mind if it looks like Fortnite, or they're okay with that, but everything else has got to look better than that.
The argument would be like, no, they don't mind Fortnite. They don't limit their interest in Fortnite as a platform just for Fortnite because they're also watching a Travis Scott concert in Fortnite.
True.
And I go, yeah, for free in kind of a novel way. The real future, the real conversation about an actual metaverse, like an actual singularity type metaverse where everybody is actually going and living more of their life in this virtual place than in the real world. I just think visual fidelity is a massive barrier to that because I'm okay with Fortnite looking with Fortnite. I think everyone is, and maybe some other activities, especially if it's free. But like, I don't want Anderson Cooper telling me what's going on in Ukraine to look like Fortnite.
Right. That might be tough to consume that way. Yeah.
But here's the thing. I'm on the minority. This is possibly like I'm the guy who's got an opinion and he's proven completely wrong by history.
I to be honest with you, Joel, I agree with you. And I also think that the metaverse also has a Facebook problem. The fact that all of a sudden people are hearing about metaverse for the first time. They're like, oh, so is this another Facebook thing? Is this where they're going to hack my data and everything? And then you mentioned the graphics, the presentation of Meta. You know, Zuckerberg comes out with that cheesy Roblox looking avatar of his, and people are like, it becomes a punchline on the the late night talk shows for a week. So yeah. I feel like
all those late night talk show guys are older than you and I, or
true,
about our age, or it's like if we're the generation that wants humans to look like humans, and it's actually true that the next generations after us don't care about humans looking like humans.
All right,
then I'm wrong.
Yeah,
then I'm wrong. But I'm not wrong for the hyper specific sliver and niche that I'm focused on, which is storytelling.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, Joel, because I think even though these younger consumers that like Fortnite, they also like the kick-ass graphics that are in the latest Spider-Man movie too. So if Spider-Man looked like it was shot in 1990, they'd be like, oh, that's terrible. But the Spider-Man that they see in 2022, they're like, oh, that's pretty awesome. So I do think they are discerning in that way, where I don't think they'll want all their entertainment looking like Roblox.
Well, Spider-Man's a perfect example because you actually have computer-generated versions of Spider-Man at every level, right? There is the level of the computer-generated CGI Spider-Man exists in the new multi-billion-dollar Spider-Man movie, right? But the bar for those pre-rendered top world-class CGI artists, the bar is photoreal. Then you do an animated Spider-Man, like Enter the Multiverse, which was awesome. Like that's my favorite Spider-Man movie. But it's an animated movie. It has a look. It has a style to it. It actually did what animation does best, where it wasn't chasing photoreal. It was intentionally like manifesting cinematic power from things you could only do with animation. It wasn't just chasing photoreal. It was going for a look and a style that was innovative and fresh and really exciting. And I love that movie. But then you've got like the new little Spidey and Friends cartoon on Disney Plus,
Yeah.
which it has all of the polish of like a Disney branded kids animated series. But the bar of quality is, I mean, that is a much cheaper production than the full-on theatrical Marvel movies.
No doubt.
And then you've got Spider-Man video games, which are, now you're into real-time rendering, which is so much more limited than what you can do if you're pre-rendering everything. And so you get the look of the console Spider-Man games, but the look of the little Spider-Man mobile games. And like, you have Spider-Man all the way down. And I feel like right now, all the hype around Metaverse is hype at a moment when only the preschool and below shows are what's available visually.
Right. Yeah.
And the limitation there is getting humans into the metaverse. Like everyone who has that aha moment with a VR headset, it turns into that same 2-hour conversation of like, oh my gosh, imagine you could do this. Imagine you could do that. Imagine like everyone instinctively starts imagining what VR could be so good at. And in that conversation, almost every time, it's like such a piece of our like pop culture landscape. Almost every time someone brings up, oh dude, you could be courtside at a Laker game.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And right now, Oculus is offering you courtside at NBA games, but it's a 180 video. It's a stereo video from courtside that is pretty cool. It's pretty nifty, but it's not a better product than the really polished product, which is the NBA on TV.
No doubt. No doubt. It is amazing how quickly this technology is evolving, and even the talents behind the scene. And a case in point would be The Mandalorian. When you saw the deep fake technology they used to make Mark Hamill look like he was 30 years old for the season finale of Mandalorian, and the way that character looks now in the new season of Boba Fett. It's, even though only maybe a year and a half passed between those two episodes, it feels like they've gone leaps and bounds in terms of how good that looks now.
Yeah, I mean, look, the deepfake is the weird third horse in the race that nobody even saw coming, because the race was between real-time rendering and pre-rendered visuals, and they're almost like religious camps. Like all the VFX companies in LA, when VR started to become a thing 5 years ago or 6 years ago, like they all opened a real-time department. Because the truth is, no one at Digital Domain, no one at these companies was trained in game engines, because they're actually from a very elite class of graphic artists who do the world's best pre-rendered stuff. Like real-time rendered stuff looks terrible compared to what they do.
Right.
You know, like people in the gaming world are like, look at these graphics, they look amazing. But that bar was the most innovative, best graphics ever in video games. We're still 20 years behind what a pre-rendered movie could look like.
Right.
And so it's almost like all the artisans and all the people that trained in perfecting the best possible visual output of real time, and then all the people that trained and built their careers in pre-render, they're almost like two different religions. And I've found myself accidentally at times in the middle of that religious war, because I'm just chasing quality, but it's like deeply philosophical about how we're going to get to that quality. Right. The Epic and the Unreal Engines and all the metaverse, all the game engine people of the world, like they just believe in Moore's law. They believe that real-time graphics are just going to get to the point where humans are in there outside with no uncanny, like where you can't
uncanny valley. Yeah, that stuff. Yeah. And well, that brings us to what you're doing now with CityLights. So we talked about the state of VR and the metaverse, and now talk to me about your place in what CityLights is doing now with it.
We're trying to solve for immersive content to a really, truly broad audience. And it's almost like creating a different, harder math question to answer for yourself. Because if I'm giving it away for free to promote Google, I don't have to go, is this good enough that someone would pay for it? What would people actually pay for? What would a big mainstream audience that isn't early adopters actually pay for? And so it just, we kind of internally set our bar much higher, and then we look to underwrite that content and create that content. And what it forces us often to do is we have to be pretty vertically integrated, where we have to make the movie, but we also have to go build the movie theater. So like an example of that is we saw this really special project at Sundance several years ago called Spheres. They had made a first prototype and gotten a little bit of support from Intel. Then they got a pretty nice grant from Oculus. The filmmaker's name was Eliza McNitt. She was a physicist and also a filmmaker. And she was trying to really leverage the power of VR to give people this incredible journey through the universe. And she had attracted the interest and kind of the mentorship of Darren Aronofsky, who's like obviously this world-class artistic filmmaker. Yeah. And they had made something that wasn't just like a science lesson. It was like a piece of art that was also an incredible science lesson. That was also an incredible experience of just the power of VR to take you through the universe. And so we acquired Spheres from them and put in the capital to make 2 more episodes. And then we premiered 2 more episodes, one with Patti Smith at Tribeca, and then one with Millie Bobby Brown at Venice. And we won the Grand Prix at Venice Film Festival. And when we acquired it, it was big news because, Sundance is, the news out of Sundance is always like, oh, which movies got bought for how much?
Right.
And I think, this was kind of one of the first times that, a name brand filmmaker like Aronofsky wasn't selling a movie, but was selling a VR project. And who are these CityLights guys? Why are they buying this? How are they going to make money with it? And we've licensed Spheres all over the world. We've actually recast our amazing English language celebrities with Spanish celebrities, Chinese celebrities, Korean celebrities. And we've done these like bespoke ticketed pop-ups all over the world. We did one at Rockefeller Center in New York, and tickets were $50 to see Spheres.
Wow. And
it sold out, I think, like the first day the tickets were available. The entire pop-up sold out. And like our partners that were with the space at Rockefeller Center, there was already something else scheduled after that. We couldn't really extend it, but what we saw was like there was so much pent-up demand. We could have extended that thing for much longer than the time we had it up.
Joel, why do you think that was so successful out of the box? I mean, to do something like that where you're charging money, it's not like you were, as you know, Joel, in New York City, they do all these free experiences where they basically do to just get social media impressions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Why do you think people were willing to spend $50 for something that was so new?
World-class artistry, world-class Hollywood craft. YouTube videos are free. Why do people pay to watch movies? There was a YouTube quality level to most of your AR and VR gimmickry stuff that was getting made at that time.
Right.
And in a weird way, every general, disinterested, non-early adopter person who saw a kind of like YouTube level Google Cardboard experience, it actually was like an inoculation. It actually turned them off to VR, where they're like, oh yeah, I've tried that. I've done that. For us, it's like our audience is all the people who've never done VR before. And we want to give them a mind-blowing first VR experience. And so I would say the overwhelming majority of the consumers that bought tickets to Spheres in New York, that was their first time ever doing something like in a tethered premium VR headset. And we gave them a great experience. Like it was like my first VR experience was like a roller coaster, but
right.
I just had all the characteristics of an early adopter. Like I saw the future, even though that roller coaster experience wasn't that great. There's people out there where some of the content we've made since Spheres is even better or even more visually stunning or, had bigger budgets or had even more capabilities because it was in the, just every year we can do more with it. And so a couple years later, we did this experience with King Tut's tomb that was embedded as part of King Tut's tour. They're doing a 10-year tour of all of his artifacts to celebrate that it's this year, 2022, is the 100-year anniversary of when King Tut's tomb was discovered. And we did actual photogrammetry, which is not just shooting a 360 video of a place, but shooting super high-res imagery of everything, but also scanning and creating an exact, like to the millimeter, dimensional map of that place and marrying that dimensionality with that imagery so that when you're in it in a VR headset, you can lean in and look at the details on the wall. you can walk around, you can move within that space.
Wow.
A 360 video is just a bubble, right? You're in a bubble,
Right.
You're stuck. If the camera
Spin
moves,
around.
you're gonna get sick.
Yeah.
So what we did with King Tut's Tomb, we opened it in London. It did $1 million at the box office in just a few months, and then unfortunately got shut down because of COVID. COVID hit, and all of our CityLights, kind of experiments around ticketed engagements, mainstream audiences. We basically did a bunch of tests before COVID, and the results of those tests were very positive. Like, we know this model will work. And so now, as the whole world is coming out of COVID, we're ramping up to bring these incredible VR experiences to the world. And in the meantime, the Quest has exploded as a home device that has a real audience now. All those business models that were getting funded in 2015 are actually much more investable now because you've got millions of users with Quests.
And a lot of the content you're creating, is the plan to make it available on the Oculus immediately? Because I know Spheres you can watch on an Oculus, but how about the rest of your content?
Most of our content needs to be reimagined for the home market.
Okay.
The characteristics that make something a good business and, matching consumer desires, as far as we can tell, is, really immersive, fun thing to go out and see, something that feels pretty bespoke, feels pretty special, feels like an experience you're never going to get again, or, that feels really different than everything else you've done. We've seen a desire for those experiences to be shorter. Like, people's time, in a way, is almost like worth more to them now, where they'll pay more for a 45-minute experience that's really novel than they'll pay for a 2-hour movie, because it actually frees up some of their night. And we've done some research, we've done some questionnaires with different people. How much would you pay for this and this and that? And so we have found kind of a model and a sweet spot of how long a VR experience can be out at a museum or at a movie theater or in some sort of bespoke pop-up in a retail setting, or somewhere with a lot of foot traffic where there's cool restaurants and bars, and you do something in a setting like that. The amount of time people are willing to pay for is much shorter than the expectations of a paid app on an Oculus device. The user base on Oculus is first and foremost gamers.
Right. And
they really judge games on how many hours of gameplay do I get. Right? You want $40 for a game, you better give them hours of content. Yeah. And Meta is very tuned into that. And when you talk to them about, there's a very strict curatorial process to get anything onto the Quest store. And one of the big hurdles of getting through that conversation is how many hours of content. So it's like Disney made a Frozen VR short that was really delightful, and my daughters for sure would want to see that. But it was so short that when it came time to put it on Quest, there was kind of a mismatch of needs, because Disney's used to charging a lot. Their stuff is the top of the heap, right? Very premium. And I think the Oculus team was like, hey, you can't charge more than $2 or $3 for this. So I think they put it out on Quest for $2 or $3, and it just kind of came and went, and nobody bought it because the Quest user at the time was, probably a 25-year-old guy, not a 9-year-old girl. Yeah. My 9-year-old girls loved it, but they have a dad who's in VR. That's why they really know about it.
They have no choice.
But here's the thing: if you put motion chairs in the middle of the mall and kind of turned it into the limited edition, only for 2 weeks, Frozen virtual reality immersive experience, you would have had a line of moms and 9-year-old girls out the block, right? And you could have charged $20 for that, as long as you had a good Instagrammable moment outside of the VR headset. Yeah. Take a bunch of pictures and post on we went and did the Frozen experience. How long the VR part of that experience wouldn't have even mattered that much.
Yeah. How do you bridge that audience gap? Because you brought up a couple points there, and we mentioned Assassin's Creed earlier. I think the current Assassin's Creed game, I think it says there's 100 hours of playable content or something like that. And then you, on your end, doing research on what people will consume in terms of VR, they're looking at maybe the under-hour sweet spot, whatever it may be. Is there a connection there? I mean, it seems like there's a big gap there from like 1 hour content to 100 hours. So how do you bridge it?
It's a huge gap, but it's the difference of genre, not even genre. It's a difference of whole category of content. Like games are games and stories are stories, and like obviously we're in the golden era of 20-hour plus stories. I mean, Breaking Bad's one of my favorite 20-hour plus stories, right? Like series are much more equivalent to games in terms of kind of like consumer price point and consumer expectation.
Right.
But for the out of home experience, everyone always talks about price per minute, both in terms of making the content and in selling the content. And I think the price per minute, competitor that we have to peg our quality to is whatever city you're in, what is the most expensive, best steak in that city? How long do you expect to be at dinner when you go and get the best steak in town? What's the experience you're after? Why are you paying that much for a piece of meat that you can buy at the grocery store a lot cheaper? And like, we have to create an experience that's that good. Like, we have to beat the best steak in town if we want to charge $50 for Spheres, and I think our content is doing that. Like obviously, like for King Tut, it's a lot shorter than Spheres. So we weren't charging $50. It was 20 pounds in London. Mm-hmm. And that was, in addition to the artifact tour itself. So there's a lot of like business models where we're looking at combining our VR with other experiences that have a proven audience or a proven track record of drawing crowds when it comes to town or things like that.
Sure. Or going back to the original part of our conversation, it's that recognizable IP. That is always a big draw, especially nowadays when it comes to creating content. It's like, do people know what it is? Okay, let's make that thing. And I'm curious, do you see your content mostly being created for audiences to leave their home, or do you feel like in the future there is going to be this hybrid where your content from CityLights is going to be consumed at home or consumed out of the house?
Both. Right now, most people in the world have never done VR. And so I think it's a good business model for us, and it's a great service to the entire industry to go give them incredible experiences before they ever own a headset, before they've ever done VR before. And for stories, doing that seated and having chairs that move give me the ability to move my camera, which is a huge feature for me as a storyteller. Like being able to move the camera unlocks all kinds of cinematic possibilities, which have to be mitigated when we reimagine that content for the home market, where someone's just got like something like a Quest or even the Apple product that's coming soon. If you move the camera too much, there's going to be a lot of motion sickness. So I have to kind of reimagine the TUT experience as a home experience. And in the home environment, it's less of a movie and more of a incredibly rich educational app. Like someone can go into the tomb, explore it themselves at their own pace. Yeah, they could turn on the like guided tour and hear the audio from our movie, but there's going to have to be like a much deeper, richer, like they have to click on every artifact and learn about every artifact. And now it's like that market's not there yet, right? Like school districts across the country don't have hundreds of quests. But we did have kids coming on field trips to King Tut's tomb in London. And like the unanimous thing that all the kids said was they learned more in the VR experience than they did in 3 hours at the exhibit.
That's funny. So your content, Joel, is not going to be a one size fits all. When you're imagining it from the sort of the iteration stage, where this one story we're making, this is going to be where we're going to set up a theater in London or New York City. This experience is going to be for home because, like you said, you don't want to fit like a square peg in a round hole kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, the early adopters are playing games in VR. Games is going to be a massive industry in VR, just the way games is a massive industry in the current world. Or games is going to be a massive part of the metaverse, just the way games is a big part of our current world. But games is not all there is in our world, right? There's every other industry that is looking around and going, well, what are we supposed to do for the metaverse? And the truth is, like, just partnering with like the random local VR company who makes games, they probably haven't really thought through product market fit or audience fit. And like we're even taking on, maybe like there's like a few like corporate clients or consulting type arrangements where we're helping people really think through what is their metaverse strategy, because the content for a museum that is like edutainment, where it's got all this Hollywood polish. We use celebrity voices. Eventually we'll start bringing like real celebrity actors in through volumetric capture, where it's not like it's not a cruddy cartoon of Mark Zuckerberg, but It's actually that famous person.
Oh, all the kids would want Mark Zuckerberg. Absolutely. They want the more realistic version of it. I don't even know if that exists, but go ahead, continue.
Yeah. Well, that's a bad example because real life is kind of it feels avatarish.
Right.
Like I always say, like if I can't get Anderson Cooper, if I can't get LeBron James, if I can't get Beyonce or Brad Pitt or the witness to the fire, like whatever it is, all the media landscape where I'm used to seeing actual humans communicating to me, or all the uses of screens that are not gaming. All of those need real strategy around what is it that we do in the metaverse. And like, there's people out there that believe like, oh, gamification of everything.
Yes.
And I'm not one of them. I'm not one of them. Like I think story is a massively ancient, compelling force for all cultures. And for CityLights, we are very focused on story. We're very focused on immersive stories. Now, telling the story of something that's going to be evergreen, like King Tut, that's a business decision where we're focusing on things that we know we're building library value. We know that in 10 years, people will still be interested in learning about King Tut's tomb. And we believe, and we've seen studies that are starting to actually kind of prove out that immersive VR experiences like the ones we're creating do actually help people learn with way higher efficacy. And so we know there's a big educational market. Now, our content will need to be evolved and reformatted, and we will work with whoever our buyer is to turn our content into that educational platform that we believe it can turn into over time. But I think we'll make some sort of metaverse encyclopedia entry about King Tut before we would make a King Tut game.
Let's talk about the current projects you've got on, because you warned me that you do have loose lips, so you're afraid to say something you're not allowed to talk about. But what kind of content offerings do you currently have, or maybe are about to launch, that you can share with us that won't get you in trouble?
I just can't talk about things that we haven't announced yet. But, we're working with big IP, big institutions. There's a really successful VR training company called Striver. And a friend of mine there gave me this phrase that we repeat to ourselves all over the time of like, what is VR good for? And it's, we use this acronym DIRE: dangerous, impossible, rare, or expensive. And putting someone in a place that is hard to get to, like King Tut's tomb, fits a bunch of those, right? For a lot of people, visiting King Tut's tomb is impossible, right? A lot of those kids in London that came to do their field trip, like they're never going to go to Egypt. They're never going to get to actually go inside his tomb. But that day when they got out of the positron chair, they were like, I was just inside of King Tut's tomb. Like they know, and they knew that like those walls are the actual walls. It's not just a CG game version of those walls. It's actual photogrammetry of the real thing. And so, we're talking to a lot of partners all over the world about very similar type experiences that let you experience something that's impossible for you. Let you experience something that's incredibly expensive or incredibly rare. Let you learn about things from history, because of course we can't time travel, but VR can really be a great time machine.
The interesting thing about your company, Joel, is you're a B2B and a B2C, because first and foremost, you've got to get these companies to sign up to work with you to create the content, and then you've got to make it for the consumer. That's a tricky kind of line you have to toe there, right?
Yeah, and I think we're learning, and we're learning a lot in both of those regards. I definitely skew towards like, hey, the cream's going to rise to the top. Like if we just make great content, the business models will avail themselves. Right. And that's too Pollyanna. That's too like, if you build it, they will come.
Sure.
And so I have a great business partner and a great team with me that are like super smart, with great background in finance and business, going, okay, but how are we going to underwrite this? How are we going to, what is one HMD worth to us in this market out in the public for this many months? What's the term? And so I think we're just navigating all of that. But like, I think the B2B part isn't so much selling our content to other businesses as it is helping other institutions, helping businesses, helping the estate or the creators of a certain IP really understand what value there could be with their institution or their IP in the metaverse. And they're all asking that question right now.
Yeah.
So I think we're like a really good dance partner to help them figure that out and then say, hey, we'll fund it. We'll take the capital risk because we understand it and we know you don't understand it. So like asking any major institution to take a huge bet on a VR project or the metaverse right now is probably going to have a pretty low hit rate. And so we go into a major institution and say, look, we'll take the capital risk. We'll help you understand the business model. But we think you've got something really special, either in terms of an audience that already exists for your IP or for your institution, or there's some characteristic that really is evergreen, that really does match kind of some of those dire characteristics.
All right. Well, we started this conversation, Joel, sort of teasing and making fun of the VR as we knew it as Gen Xers. So let's now look ahead. What to you, now that you've been involved in this world for a decade or so, what do you see as the future of VR? And I don't mean in terms of how we're going to view it and stuff like that, but like, do you see people making full-length feature films in VR? Do you see it where it's so mainstream that grandma's got a VR headset and she's watching, Jeopardy on it? Like, where do you see the VR going?
It kind of depends on the time frame you're talking about. I know people involved at the very cutting edge of getting humans into it so realistically you can't tell the difference. I know the companies that are pushing pixel density on these HMDs to get to the point where human vision can't tell the difference. I'm advising a company that is working on computer brain interfaces that make you feel the movement, even if you're not in a mechanically moving chair. There's companies out there I don't know about that are working on all the other haptic and sensory elements that will make it so real that everyone will want it. Everyone will be putting it on their head to do every possible thing that is actually better to do that way. And that's the hard part. Like, that's the real hard philosophical part, where there is almost a skeuomorphic zeal to say a real world experience is better than a virtual experience, like morally better, substantially better, like some sort of rooted in a ultimate reality that this real experience is better than this fake experience. But if my great grandma is immunocompromised and can't be at her great grandson's recital, and like everyone uses these like family connection,
sure,
emotional
tug the heartstrings, right? Yeah.
It's the example at the end of every like third act where the character arc is the workaholic learning that family matters more, right? Like the third act of Elf, it's like, don't miss the recital, like whatever that is. But like you use that example to go like, is it better for her to have a flat screen and and like an okay FaceTime feed of that recital? Or is it better for her to put on a headset and have an experience that is like actually sitting right on the edge of the stage watching her great-grandson perform? And like, I can map out the exact tech stack that it'll take to get there. The biggest hurdle is video cards and the approach to volumetric human capture. Because right now everyone's doing an approach that feeds it into a triangle-based, like Unreal Engine, or feeds it into a visual effects pipeline. And my problem is I think all of that never gets out of Uncanny Valley. And there's other versions of how to do it that I think are getting way closer to getting humans into the metaverse. I don't think most people, this is my contrarian belief, I just don't think most people will ever do it if it's all just a bunch of like wacky avatars.
Right.
I think once humans are in it, like actual humans are in it, and that's just ubiquitously available for humans to go in and out, which means human capture and the way we render humans. So that's the capture systems that have not been invented yet, and video cards that can just handle that level of detail. Those two bottlenecks are where like Moore's law and inevitability is what people are banking on. And maybe it's some massive breakthrough on AI. Like you talked about, like deepfakes kind of came out of nowhere and did things that only visual effects were previously doing. And so maybe it's, some sort of quantum computing breakthrough or some sort of AI breakthrough that gets us there much faster than where the current kind of infrastructure gets us. But as much as I'm like wary of inevitability, I know the people building it, right? If no one was building it, it wouldn't be inevitable, but I know the people building it. And I know it's going to get very realistic. And to the degree that it gets very realistic is to the degree that there's way more use cases for grandma.
Well, it's to pardon the pun, but it does sound like the future does look bright for CityLights. His name is Joel Newton. He's the co-founder of CityLights. Joel, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. And that's it for this edition of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoy the show, make sure you take a quick second to subscribe so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.